This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, a vibrant online learning community providing high-quality educational content, the opportunity to connect with peers, and an outlet for new ideas in the field of nonprofit fundraising research.
If anyone is interested in multivocational life, be it as an artist or a baker or anything else, I have found it to feed one another in beautiful ways, and I would highly endorse it.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. This interview is part of the Career Curious series. Hello, I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Kat Banakis, Senior Vice President at Grenzebach Gleer & Associates.
Hello, Kat. Thank you for joining me on Chat Bites.
Thank you, Jen.
It's great to have you here today, and I'm hoping that we can start the conversation with what you're doing right now at GGNA. What's your role there?
So right now, I am leading our advanced analytics team, which means that we do everything around forecasting at the prospect level for campaigns, for staffing, for size of organization, everything like that, based on the individuals in a prospect pool or the need to acquire more prospects through some means. And so it's a combination of capacity and inclination and past involvement and using all those different variables to do planning, whether we're doing that as a firm or helping organizations do that themselves. And of course, prospect research and prospect management are an integral part of that. Whenever we have the opportunity to use what's already been verified, absolutely want to do that. And it is a rare instance in which the outcomes of a project that we do not rely heavily on partnering with prospect management and research when they're there, or if they don't exist within an organization, trying to find a way that we can help shore up an organization to do those functions, because they're such critical partners in strategic planning and campaign execution and everything like that.
Right. And in addition to working in the fundraising arena, I know that you're also a vicar. This is a very special week for you as we're approaching our spring holidays. How did that happen?
It is. So we happen to be doing this interview on the Tuesday of Holy Week. Hence, I am in a clerical collar because on the Tuesday of Holy Week, my bishop asks that we renew our vows. I'm ordained in the Episcopal Church. So this morning I was at our cathedral doing that. And I actually got into the world of fundraising through the religious world. I went to seminary, and when I was graduating, I knew I would have a little bit of time in between when I graduated SEM and when I was ordained. And so I interviewed every clergy person I respected. And I said, what would you do if you had some time? What do you wish you knew more of? Down to a one, they said fundraising. So I ended up getting a job as a frontline person out at a small education access nonprofit. And then through that, got into the world of fundraising operations. And it's been, I have to say for me, just a gift and a fantastic blend, because the world of doing religious life is, it's endless, right? Your job is to make people's lives more meaningful, to knit a community closer in and amongst itself. And it's work that I adore. And in the world of consulting and fundraising, there are just really clear outcomes, which is a really nice thing to have on the other side. But in both cases, I feel like the commonality is that in both cases, you're doing steps of translation and deciding what the narrative is and what's important. So sometimes I'm translating ancient Greek and Hebrew and trying to make it relevant to a modern day audience. In my client engagements with GGNA, I'm looking at mountains of data and potential outcomes and trying to sift out what's the narrative and the story here, what's going to be inspiring for my clients so that they feel like, yes, we can do this thing. Or if it's bad news, maybe we do this other thing. And so I think that that's sort of the common skill between them. And in both fundraising and in religious life, you're trying to inspire people to dream bigger than they maybe thought that they could and to tap into their passions. And the religious tradition that I'm a part of has a high elevation of what we call the priesthood of all believers. That is, anyone who is part of the community is pretty much on an equal playing field in terms of their obligation to live out their faith in the public world. And so 364 days a year, I don't wear my collar to work, but I'm living in the same way that everybody else is. And it's been quite wonderful. Sometimes negotiating the travel schedules is a challenge, but that's a first world modern day problem that happily video chat gets around a lot of.
Yes, it does. And I never thought of those overlaps between your two worlds before. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and people come into prospect research in so many ways, right? It's people who love research and background and language and facts and those sorts of things. So I think there's absolutely no one path into prospect research, prospect management. If ever there's a case for a liberal arts education, most of us in this realm are it.
So true. So now that you're a vicar and you're a consultant in analytics, you mentioned that you had worked at a nonprofit, and I'm just wondering, what was it like to make the transition to being a consultant as opposed to a practitioner for a nonprofit organization?
Yeah, so there is, I live with a great deal of what I feel like is burden and obligation as a consultant in trying not to mess up people's lives, right? Because consultants at their worst do a surgical diagnostic and leave. And they can blow up an organization, they can blow up people's lives with the recommendations simply because they're coming in from the outside and therefore are granted a credence that hopefully we have earned. We certainly want to have, but there are also people who then are working and living within an organization. And I think that that's the biggest change between being within an organization and working as a consultant. My favorite projects are where we do an initial engagement and then there's an extended relationship and you get to see how there are fits and starts and it plays out and life unfolds in a more rich manner than any initial study is going to reveal. And I think that what goes along with that is that in many cases, one can see within their own organization what could be different, what could be possible. And I always want to be working in a way as a consultant that earns the respect of being an outside third-party voice in that way. I'm lucky that over time I've gotten to work with people over a long period of time at many client sites. That's, of course, the downside in many instances, though, is that you do an engagement, you do a study, and then it is over. And whether working in a secular nonprofit or working in the church, there is a continuity of relationship and the ability to grow and change together over time that as a consultant, you don't always have the luxury of being part of that in the long term. The flip side of that is that it's super interesting, right? It's really fun. You can take on new projects and develop them and new diagnostic work, and that's endlessly fascinating. You don't get to do it in quite the same way. And I think that's part of also why having the church as part of my life has been important, because it is fully, for lack of a better term, incarnate, corporeal, right? You are showing up face to face and doing this work together in person. And a lot of data analytics consulting is someone sending me a file through a server. And then, we'll have some video calls and we'll figure it out. And we do our very, very best, but it's different than living it together. One of the nice things in being in both of these worlds, though, is that I can pressure test things within my congregation. So if we come up with, a brand new strategy of things for a small nonprofit, sometimes I'll see how it plays in the parish as a starting point, and vice versa. We'll come up with an idea in the parish, and I'll be able to spitball it at work. So that's been a nice balance of things. And being within a multidisciplinary firm also has some parallels to being within an organization, because we have people here who are within the firm who specialize in annual giving and alumni relations and plan giving and principal gifts and all of that. So there is a holistic approach and an attempt with things that somewhat parallels what you have in a development office. And I realize that you're interviewing me, but flipping it back to you, do you have the same thing in doing consultative research, that it feels a little bit more distant?
Definitely. It's actually something that we are looking to do differently, to offer a different kind of service, to have more long-lasting relationships that have a bigger impact. Because it's the same thing when you are in the back office. If all you're doing is pushing out one transaction and then leaving, the opportunity for that to succeed, it's greatly reduced. But if you can be there along the way and help that grow, it's fulfilling for us as individuals, but it also, I think, is a much more valuable process for the client. I agree. Definitely more fun.
Way more fun.
And one of the beautiful things about consulting, in my opinion, is that you get to see so many different kinds of organizations, so many different types of people. Whereas inside one organization, there's a lot of, positive things about that, but you are limited to how they run.
Yeah, and you're able, at best case, right, to bring some of that to bear in any given situation, which is, of course, like why you hire a consultant, to be able to see how it's working elsewhere, that there might be parallels, even if it's in a different industry, right? Because sometimes I'll see something that's incredibly innovative in a social service agency that's really, really neat, that actually has direct application to an arts organization or a medical organization that I'm working with, that they might not have been able to see by serving other organizations of their kind.
Right, that's true. And I know that in research, so many times when I talk to different researchers, they do have all kinds of different backgrounds and hobbies and degrees. And I think it's a lot of fun that you started the Holy Holy podcast. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that happened and why you do that?
Yeah. So the Holy Holy podcast is an interfaith social ethics podcast. So each episode we take on a different issue of what's called applied ethics. So what does it mean to be a good parent? How do we think about death? And we are going to have a whole series coming up about social justice issues in Chicago around recidivism and employment, the cost of childcare, and then something around probably immigration and refugee status as it relates to the impact on jobs that are available. And I started it because the ways that we live our lives hopefully can be positively influenced by the wisdom of faith traditions. And I wanted to bring together the Abrahamic traditions in ways that were highly practical to the ways that people lived, so that it wasn't so obscure. And so each episode has a congregational leader or community leader from the Jewish community, a rabbi, and an ordained Christian leader talking about those topics, as well as a secular expert on whatever the topic of the day is. And, I realize I'm trying to bring it back a little bit to prospect research, but, prospect research at its best is bringing together all different pieces to try and say, like, what a good prospect is or isn't for an organization. And I think it's a similar instinct to try to figure out, of these different traditions and of the social science and the scientific research on a given topic, what's useful, what's helpful, what makes us able to feel like we're contributing members of society and building a case for peace in the world. And in the same way that sometimes when you're looking really deeply into a prospect or dealing one-on-one with a fundraiser, there's a way of intimacy that feels like, oh, I have found something almost precious in this interaction or in this scenario. The process of doing interviews and panels for the podcast feels the same. Here's a topic that is sort of interesting, and then dealing with the people one-on-one, it becomes something greater than the sum of the parts and feels like standing on holy ground in a way. And so the production and hosting of the podcast has been a virtuous cycle in terms of being energizing. And I think that particularly in these first few decades of the 21st century, anything we can do to build understanding and peace across religious traditions in the U.S. is a net positive, and to try to figure out more around what there is in commonality. And it might be a uniquely American problem in that way or issue, but worth putting some emphasis on either way.
It sounds like a lot of human psychology to me, and that's
maybe.
That is certainly a thread. What we do in philanthropy is all about human beings, and giving is definitely a psychological event.
Yeah, and what are people's motivations, right? Why are they behaving in the way that they are?
I think one of the most daring things and fun things about you that I know is that you wrote a book about yourself. That's putting a lot out there, and I'd love to hear a little bit about what was that journey? Why did you write that book?
Sure. So I wrote a spiritual memoir a couple of years ago about my journey into ordination and the priesthood, in large part because I really, really geek out on what's called systematic theology. So this is this academic discipline of how you explain God from the beginning to the end. And there's a different doctrine or treatise for each of these things. And everyone has their own thing. This is a thing that keeps me up at night and gets me up in the morning. I just think that systematics is the coolest thing. And I wanted to share my enthusiasm for it to others, and particularly within religious communities. But because it's such an abstract concept, I needed to put it in a format that was highly accessible. So the arc of the memoir has its own integrity and storyline, but also each chapter is dealing with the doctrine of systematic theology and intended for use of personal reflection or group reflection around that. The religious life is not a life of perfection, and so I wanted to also be able to communicate that in a very candid way. I try to be as candid as possible in terms of living with anxiety and depression and my doubts about faith and everything like that, so that can crack things open for people to have room within their own questions and thoughts and realities of living. And happily, it's been several years now, and there's been very little negative fallout.
So I definitely have a copy. It's called Bubble Girl, An Irreverent Journey of Faith. So you can find this on Amazon.
You can indeed, and I would love for you to.
Before I let you go, I'm wondering if you have any career tips for researchers.
Yeah. So I was actually just talking to this woman who worked, her name's Carrie Thomas, and she's the head of the Chicago Jobs Council, which is an employment and economic development cohort in Chicago. And she was saying it is a fallacy that any job or career in today's day and age is lifetime. Every job is getting you ready for what that next job is going to be. And very few people are going to have the same job for their entire working years. And I thought that was just such great counsel in general, and particularly in the realm of prospect research, as campaigns evolve and the access to data evolves and everything like that. It's in such a wonderful transitive place of having some elements that are quantitative and some that are really forecasting and looking towards the future and different ways of partnering with different departments. And I think that is just the most fun thing about work, of what can be the next thing within it. And particularly since so few of us came into this realm of things from prospect research, we all came from somewhere else. I'm thinking about how it grows and evolves and changes at different organizations and what kind of partnership it is, I think is the really fun part of prospect research. And I would imagine that all of the sources that we have at our fingertips will just become more and more available. So this is a fun time to be thinking about what our value add will be in any given organization. And selfishly, I am a huge advocate of having multiple identities. And I have found having a day job and a side gig to be the best thing ever. So if anyone is interested in multi-vocational life, be it as an artist or a baker or anything else, I have found it to just feed one another in beautiful ways, and I would highly endorse it.
That's great advice. I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing with all of the researchers today, and I really appreciate your being candid and open with us.
Well, thank you so much, Jen, for the opportunity, and I look forward to further conversation and all great things coming out of the Prospect Research Institute.
Great. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That was Kat Banakis, Senior Vice President at Grenzebach, Gleer & Associates. To find chat bites and more prospect research resources, join us in the Resource Collections community at prospectresearchinstitute.org.